The app and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Nigel Farage says he has mixed feelings about the sentence handed to an asylum seeker who threatened to kill him. 26-year-old Fias posted a video online a year ago. The Afghan national who arrived in the UK on a small boat has been jailed for 5 years. The Reform UK leader, who was in court for the sentencing, spoke outside.
It was right to bring this case. I'm happy with the sentence. I'm happy with the win. But I repeat, in 18 months' time, this violent criminal will be free on our streets. He said he'd rather go back to Afghanistan. That's what he wants to do, and we should satisfy that as soon as we can.
Hamas says it will hand over the bodies of a further 4 hostages taken on October the 7th. Israel earlier said it would reduce aid going into Gaza over the failure to release their remains. Former Premier League referee David Coote will be sentenced in December for making an indecent image of a child. He pleaded guilty earlier. And economists have warned prices will rise faster in the UK than any other G7 country this year and next. The IMF has revealed its latest forecasts. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 9 points at 94.52. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather: clear spells for Scotland and the southwest tonight. Cloudy elsewhere with a chance of drizzle in the far north and far southeast. Lows of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. I told you yesterday it was a day of hope, not of pessimism. And the hostages are still free, and so are the prisoners, and the Israeli bombs and shells are not raining down on Gaza, all still true. As Keir Starmer told the Commons this afternoon, 2 years of living hell are over. Mercifully, he said, the killing and destruction has now stopped and aid is beginning to enter Gaza. But yesterday I also mentioned the huge obstacles still ahead, and already today they've become obvious. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, said Martin Luther King. Well, long is certainly right. The IDF has shot dead 3 people they said crossed an agreed demarcation line. Peace-loving Hamas, meanwhile, killed at least 8 people, bound and beaten first in gleeful public executions of collaborators. Whoever goes in now to try to keep order in Gaza has a horrendously difficult job ahead. President Trump himself has moved briskly on from peace in the Middle East to suggest that he wants a new breakthrough in the Ukraine war and is prepared to use American Tomahawk missiles, which can strike deep inside Russia to help Kyiv. Could he really make it a double, or is this a dangerous escalation we should all fear? Well, I want to talk first tonight to Mick Mulvaney, the former White House Chief of Staff under Donald Trump and US Special Envoy to Northern Ireland. Mr. Mulvaney, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us. Can I ask, first of all, about your sense of what the American administration is prepared to do inside Gaza, because it already seems that Hamas are fanning out across the territory, armed again. Now, American forces are going to be involved, but not at the moment actually crossing into Gaza itself and acting as peacekeepers. So what's going to happen, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very fluid situation, Andrew. By the way, thanks as always for having me on the show. I think what you saw yesterday, goodness, it's only yesterday now, with the meetings in Israel, then again the meetings in Egypt, was that Trump was trying to build this coalition, for lack of a better word, or at least people who have a vested interest in seeing this program succeed. That, you know, if you're going to go and sign off on the documents and shake hands and be on TV, you know, with Donald Trump to celebrate this announcement, then you're sort of invested in seeing it succeed. The real key to whether or not Hamas is going to be able to be brought to bear is whether or not they can still raise money or not. It looks like their flow of funds, where they were stealing aid, will be cut off. It looks like their flow of funds from Iran may be dramatically reduced. It looks like their flow of funds from Qatar might be completely reduced. So, yeah, is it going to be difficult? I think it is, but I think the pieces might be there for some long-term success.
Yasser Arafat's nephew, who's still a player in Palestinian politics, says that he thinks Hamas has to evolve from being the terrorist force it is today, he wouldn't use the word terrorist, into being a political organisation, but should then be part of the future of Palestine. A little bit, and I mentioned your Northern Ireland connection, a little bit like Sinn Féin and the IRA. Do you see some kind of future for Hamas if it renounces weapons inside Gaza?
That's exactly where my head was going. I mean, who would have thought 30 years ago that Sinn Féin could be one of the more popular parties in the Republic right now? So I think it's possible. There's no question. But there has to be pressure brought on Hamas. They have to decide for themselves that they want to do that. I'd be curious to see who the next generation of leadership is. Keep in mind that most of the people running the place a year ago, 2 years ago, were dead. So it will be fascinating to see what sort of individual rises up, or a group of individuals that rise up within Hamas, or if there are other groups, and there's been some reporting about this, other groups within Gaza and in even the West Bank who want to challenge Hamas for the leadership of the Palestinian efforts and so forth. So again, all conversations that are fascinating that we couldn't have a week ago.
Forgive me for what might come across as a robust, even a rude question. Do you think President Trump, who you know quite well, has the focus, the concentration to keep with this, or do you think it's a one-off, great moment, Middle East tick, and move on?
Yeah, I don't take it as an offensive question, and his style is certainly to jump around from topic to topic. So I get that, but what I think folks miss is that he really does care about peace. I know that sounds to some people like it's nonsensical, but that's part of his fiber. He cares about 5 or 6 things in the whole world when it comes to politics. Immigration is one, trade is another, but he really does care about peace. There's a reason he didn't start a war in his first term, even though he was encouraged by many of his senior advisors to do so. He really doesn't like war. So I think he's got a commitment to this, and his name is on it now. If it fails, he fails. If it succeeds, he succeeds. And I think that's something that means a great deal to him.
But committed to peace, he does nonetheless have a certain grasshopper mind, if I can put it that way. Yeah. And he's clearly already moved on to talk about Iran and now Russia as well. And he's made this threat of using or offering Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine to help them end the war. That's a really interesting moment, because clearly Ukraine needs more leverage, but at the same time it's highly provocative and might well be seen as a thing that tips Putin over the edge.
It does, but it's for those of us who know him well, it doesn't surprise us, and here's why. Donald Trump thrives on optimism and momentum, and he's got that right now. Keep in mind how many of those people on stage with him yesterday from various countries, including your own, that have sort of either quietly or out loud questioned his approach to what was happening in Gaza. And I can imagine him turning around last night and saying, okay, boys and girls, we're doing it my way because it worked here. So he's going to be building this momentum, building some optimism. And it doesn't surprise me that he immediately turned to Russia and Ukraine.
Mick, the obvious comparison is the amount of personal pressure he can put on Netanyahu because of America's involvement in Israel for so many decades. He's got real leverage there, but he doesn't have the same kind of leverage over President Putin. So how do you think he's going to try and handle that very difficult relationship next? Yeah,
try and find a way to create leverage. Which may be what the Tomahawks are all about. Look, he does have certain leverage, certainly a lot more leverage over Zelensky than he does over Putin. Zelensky will be here on Friday. But I do think, to your point, that Trump has discovered now after 9 months in office that the real impediment here to peace is not Vladimir Zelensky. It's Putin, and he knows that now. So he's going to try and figure out a way to build that leverage up. Having all of those folks from all of those countries stand behind him yesterday in Jerusalem, or excuse me, in Israel and Egypt, is part of that. That if he wants to go to Putin and say, look, it's you against the world right now. Obviously, China, India weren't there and so forth, but there's certainly more momentum on the Donald Trump side of the ledger right now than there was a couple days ago.
Mick Mulvaney, we always really enjoy hearing from you. Thank you very much indeed for that tonight. Now, I'm joined in the studio by the chair of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry. Emily, welcome. Picking up on some things we were talking about there, it is clearly a very, very dangerous situation still on the ground in Gaza, not surprising. There was an indication, a hint from Keir Starmer yesterday, I think, that we might become involved ourselves, that we might even put some kind of peacekeeping force into that area. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to continue with the momentum, absolutely, and we have to keep driving towards a political solution, and it isn't done. It's just a ceasefire. And so it is very important that everyone remains involved, and and Donald Trump needs to remain involved, and he needs, even if he goes off and does some other things, in the short term, we will need to continue to bring him back to focus on the Middle East, because the details may be able to be done by others, but in the end, as I've always said, you need the power of Donald Trump in order to ensure that it happens, right? I think what Keir Starmer has said is he's talked about the importance of disarming Hamas and Britain playing a role in doing that. And we have got history in terms of getting a negotiated settlement with the IRA and getting the disarmament. So we know how hard it can be, and we have experience of doing that. So I can see the sense in us bringing that experience and that expertise to peace. But we will need to have lots of different countries doing different things. I think the other thing that we've said that we're going to do in the short term is we're going to play a pivotal role in aid and in ensuring that the hospitals are up and running.
Absolutely essential. What about a pivotal role for Tony Blair? Because there has been quite a lot of Palestinian pushback against the idea of any sort of semi-colonial Western board of peace or whatever it's called running Gaza in the short term. They accept that Tony Blair understands the region, but they think his record is not exactly unspotted.
I don't want to put any barriers in the way of peace. Basically, my view is anything that works, I'm up for.
Yeah.
So it won't work unless all parties agree.
In a sense, that's what I'm asking about. It's only going to work if the Palestinians have real ownership and buy into this as well.
Yes.
Is there not a danger of the West coming in and imposing something on Gaza, on Palestine, which isn't theirs, and that's why it unravels?
Yeah. I think that it's quite complicated, because I think that we're not going to deliver a Palestinian state tomorrow. It's going to take a while, and we have to be realistic about that, and there has to be a pathway to that. Everyone says there has to be a pathway to a Palestinian state. So the interim arrangements will not be purely Palestinian. There will need to be other parties involved, whilst confidence is built on all sides. Yeah. But to ignore the Palestinian views on this would obviously, is not sensible. Yeah. So a balance has to be found.
Speaking of Palestinian views, I had the UK ambassador for Palestine, Humza Zomlot, sitting in that chair a little while ago, and he was saying there's absolutely no way that Hamas is going to be involved in the future of Palestine. And yet plenty of other people are saying, yes, it's going to have to be involved. They are already fanning out right across Gaza, heavily armed. There were hideous videos today of them executing, a mass execution in public of people they regard as traitors or collaborators or whatever. Awful, a terrorist group behaving like a terrorist group. What do you think the future for Hamas has to be?
I think there should be no future in Gaza for Hamas. I think that in the end, it will need to all be under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority. I think the Palestinian Authority has a lot of work to do in order to get itself into a sufficiently healthy state to be able to run Palestine in the long term. What is Hamas? I suppose is the other question. They don't have kind of membership cards.
There's a lot of guys with the green bandanas and the Kalashnikovs.
Well, there are those, but there are also, it's also said that given that Hamas was running the Strip, then people working in the hospitals were Hamas employees, or street cleaners. Are they Hamas? Sometimes
it's a very difficult thing.
It's nebulous, isn't it?
Yes. Emily, thank you very much indeed for that.
Not at all.
Because listening to us was Daniel Levy, the former Israeli negotiator and advisor to several Israeli prime ministers. Daniel, thank you very much indeed for joining us again. As somebody, who knows quite a bit about how to negotiate with Palestinian groups and others, what is your view of the sort of rivalry still going on clearly between the Palestinian Authority on the one side and Hamas on the other? How is that going to be negotiated?
Well, it's a tragedy for Palestinians, first and foremost, that they don't have a unified national political address that can set out a program. If you had that, then I think it would be much easier to take the colonial governance structure of Gaza headed by, Governor Blair. 100 plus years after the Balfour Declaration, we're going to have the Blair Declaration, are we? But in the absence of that, it makes it much easier for others to play in those cracks. And that's why it is first and foremost a Palestinian prerogative and necessity to get that act together. And I'm going to disagree with what you've heard until now, Andrew, and say Hamas will have to be part of that. Were the IRA ruled out in Ireland because they carried out revenge killings? What happened just before those killings, which I would in no way condone or justify, is that the clans and militias paid for and armed by Israel assassinated a very popular journalist in Gaza. And so you are going to need Hamas inside the tent. And Hamas were, of course, the key interlocutor with the Americans, with the mediating parties throughout this.
And I suppose the same kind of underlying offer that was made to the IRA Sinn Féin organisation, which is lay down the arms and there is a future for you in politics. You will gain by politics some of the things you have failed to get by armed revolt.
Exactly. But what did the IRA and Sinn Féin say for decades? Show us a credible political process. And that's the missing thing right now. There is not a credible political process. And therefore, I can tell you with a significant degree of certitude that there will not be a full decommissioning. You could have, and I think this is something Hamas have been hinting at or suggesting in talks, you could have some of the heavy weapons handed to a legitimate Palestinian, perhaps overseen by internationals that are accepted process. You could have the non-display of weapons, but you are not going to go to a situation where occupation and apartheid are retained and the weapons of the resistance are given up. What Israel couldn't achieve on the battlefield vis-a-vis Hamas, it won't get in a negotiation that's not pragmatic and realistic.
And Daniel, does that mean that a kind of Western oversight body, perhaps putting in Arab or Western troops from outside Palestine to try to remove weapons from Hamas is doomed? That's just going to be another bloody piece of sort of civil war inside the territory.
Well, Andrew, I would draw a distinction between two things. In that very flimsy paper, which doesn't, the 20 points, which really gives us nothing to work with, it doesn't mention the West once. But in that paper, you have a facility for an international stabilization force. If you were to have such a force with a UN mandate, and there are countries willing to contribute to that. They're not actually Arab countries in the region primarily, and that may be a good thing. But if you had that force with a mandate to protect Palestinians, to act as a tripwire to Israeli interventions, and if that ended the Israeli occupation, first at least in Gaza, set that precedent, and if that was negotiated with a Palestinian body that could speak for Hamas, and Hamas could say, OK, here are reasonable conditions. The IRA didn't give everything up all at once.
No, they didn't.
And that would be a serious process, Andrew. Instead, what we have is a set of demands that aren't going to be realized, that aren't realistic, that can't get Palestinian buy-in, including the idea of, I think you used the word yourself earlier, of some kind of colonial governance structure. The Good Friday Agreement was about further peeling back British colonization on the island of Ireland, whether in the south or in the 6 provinces. This document currently is really about entrenching Israeli colonization. That won't go along with peace and security, I'm afraid.
Really, really interesting. Time to turn to the politics. Daniel Levy, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Really appreciated. Now, there is some good news for the UK economy. Have we finally got something to be hopeful about? Time now, 6:19.
This is LBC.
Buying a home on a holiday park was the retreat you always wanted. But then came unexpected site fee increases. And that was before the dramatic loss in value. If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, you may have been missold. holidayparkadvicecentre.co.uk could help you receive thousands in compensation. Text ASSIST to 78900. That's ASSIST to 78900.
Fraud can happen faster than you think. But at Barclays, we use innovative technology that spots fraud in under a second. And our dedicated team of experts work 24/7. So you can go about your day knowing we never stop working to keep you and your money safe. Search Barclays Fraud Protection to see how you can stay one step ahead. Barclays. Make money work for you.
At Amazon, over 50% of deliveries now come with less packaging or with no added packaging at all. It's a difference you'll notice on your doorstep, where you chat with friends, where your neighbour's daughter practices guitar, and where we deliver your new noise-cancelling headphones in the manufacturer's packaging. Ah, much better. Reduced packaging from Amazon. We're delivering change where it matters, on your doorstep. Based on 2024 UK and EU Amazon packaging data.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
And it is 6:21, and the IMF published its growth forecast for the UK today. And safe to say the verdict was pretty mixed. What might it mean, therefore, for the Chancellor as she prepares for her budget next month? Our political editor, Natasha Clark, is here with the details. Mixed news on growth, first of all, Natasha.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. So all of this political international context, of course, is super relevant as the Chancellor weighs up all of her options for the next few weeks for that crucial budget. Most economists at the moment think we've got around £30 billion to fill in terms of an economic black hole for her to balance the books. The good news for her from this IMF report that's out today is that forecasts upgraded slightly a bit for growth. So more receipts to play with, more money going into the Treasury. But the real story...
will be the second fastest growing G7 country.
Exactly. And they're really pleased with the first half of the year and how that's gone in terms of where our standing is. But the real story, inflation, and we are doing really poorly on that front, 3.7%. It's going to come down slightly, but still the cost of living still really biting for so many families ahead of this budget. So less money for Rachel Reeves to pay for with public sector pay. And as Helen Miller of the IFS said earlier today, if the debt interest were a government department, it would be the second biggest on Whitehall. We are spending so much money and inflation doesn't help with that at all, does it?
Flying out to the bond markets and to all those American asset companies and so on. We don't get to see any of it. Now, you spent, I know, a little bit of today sitting in front of sitting behind the Treasury Select Committee and listening to a bunch of very, very clever economists talk about what the options were in the budget. So, in short, what did you learn?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you've got the Treasury trying to rush through some of these planning reforms. They want the OBR to be scoring everything so highly. So that £30 billion economic black hole can be as small as possible. A range of options that the Chancellor is, of course, looking at. We heard today from experts from the IFS, the Resolution Foundation, people like Dan Needle, the tax expert. Most of them, I think, were agreed, Andrew. They don't think Rachel Reeves is going to break her fiscal rules, but they do think she is going to have to raise taxes. I think that is very much now the sort of understood opinion of most people in government and also out. The things that they think that she should look at, wide-ranging capital gains tax, inheritance tax. But the one thing that most of them had in common is they believe that this is an opportunity for Rachel Reeves both to raise money and to reform the tax system, and that they can do that both in this budget. Basically, if you put those things together, then Rachel Reeves will come out of this with some more money, and actually it will create a more efficient tax system so that she'll be able to rake in more later down the line. The problem is, obviously, Andrew, there's a difference between economics and the political reality. Yeah. Whether she can sell that to the hard backbenchers is still a question that many people don't have answers to.
I think the bottom line is probably if you're listening to this and you're feeling relatively well off, she's coming for you. Finally, I mentioned right at the top of the show, Natasha, Keir Starmer in the Commons, a really important intervention about the Gaza peace process. He's come flying back from Sharm el-Sheikh and he was talking to MPs. Just give us the headlines on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a 3-point plan really for Sir Keir Starmer today, talking about all of the ways that he believes that the UK can play a part going forward. The question on everyone's lips is that going to mean boots on the ground? So Yvette Cooper said to us last week, no, there's no plans for any troops to go. The question is whether that will be personnel, and that's a question that the government are pretty tight-lipped over at the moment. But Keir Starmer, I thought, was really interesting from that statement, firstly saying that the recognition of Palestine has actually helped get this deal over the line. That is something that many of his critics, including Kenny
controversial thing to say.
Absolutely do not agree with at all. The other thing that he told MPs earlier is that he thought our role in the Northern Ireland peace process gave us good stead to help with decommissioning weapons.
To help ensure security in Gaza through a ceasefire monitoring process, planning for the International Stabilisation Force, and, Mr. Speaker, drawing on our experience in Northern Ireland, we stand ready to play a full role in the decommissioning of Hamas weapons and capability. Because, as this House knows, there can be no viable future for Gaza, no security for Israel, if Hamas can still threaten bloodshed and terror.
Absolutely fascinating. It really kind of sets the agenda for the evening, I think. Natasha, for now, thank you very much indeed. Because as we were just discussing Britain's experience of the Northern Ireland peace process, where the decommissioning or putting beyond use of weapons was absolutely crucial, are there any lessons for what's ahead in Palestine? Shaun Woodward was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland from 2007 to 2010, and he joins me now. Shaun, very good to have you on the show indeed. We were hearing from Mick Mulvaney earlier in the show, who said that he thought, as it were, the transition from the IRA as it was at the worst of the Troubles to Sinn Féin today is the same kind of thing that might conceivably happen to Hamas. In other words, it moves from being a terrorist organisation, and as I said, we saw public executions today, to being something a little bit more like modern Sinn Féin. Do you think that's plausible?
Look, I think it's plausible. And let me start, Andrew, by just saying I think what happened yesterday was extraordinary, and nothing we might go on to say now takes away from the joy of seeing those still alive returned, and at the same time, the absolute ongoing agony for those whose hostages are dead and haven't been returned. What happened to them? I mean, there are so many questions out there, and I put that out there because, you know, I think yesterday was an extraordinary day, but as we let the sort of embers begin to fall away and we start discussing things like decommissioning, the thing we've got to remind ourselves of, the biggest parallel with Northern Ireland, is that Northern Ireland was a process, it was not a moment. And we're all slightly responding to this in the moment of yesterday.
Quite
and
right.
what we're not doing is getting our heads around the fact that there were several years before the Good Friday Agreement. You know, we keep talking about GFA and 1998 as a moment. But of course, there were several years before that, which included a Conservative Prime Minister, John Major, doing what he was doing, publicly, of course, saying that to deal with the IRA would turn my stomach stick. But at the same time, we now know that, in fact, all kinds of conversations were taking place. So was yesterday a summary moment of several years' work? To some extent, yes. Going forward, does it mark the moment? Well, the Prime Minister in the House this afternoon talks about it being a chance. So I think everything we might say around decommissioning now is in the context of it being a process, not a moment, and a chance and an opportunity. But if anything's going to bring us all back to the reality of the moment, it was those executions we saw taking place by Hamas, which tells us just what we're dealing with, because we weren't looking at that with the IRA at the moment the Good Friday Agreement was signed. And so I just say this because I think Britain has a huge role to play in helping with decommissioning. I think it could have an enormous role to play and probably be the primus inter pares with our experience. And Jonathan Powell is a hugely experienced figure in all of this. But I have a measure of caution here because yesterday was a great moment, but it's part of an ongoing process. And I would like to think we're going in the right direction, but I'm pretty nervous too.
Well, I think that's well said. I'm very glad you mentioned John Major, because he very often gets cut out of the story of the peace process in Northern Ireland, and he was very important in the earlier stages. But in a sense, aren't you saying that when you talk about process, we're talking about a political process, and therefore a political process which gives all the players, including some very, very unsavoury players, some hope of achieving some of their ends in a purely political way. In other words, there needs to be a political process. But just as in Northern Ireland there was a lot of suspicion initially of people coming in, Americans coming in and others, so in this case there's going to be a great deal of suspicion of, as it were, a Western imposition on top of Palestine without the buy-in of Palestinians themselves.
Yeah, look, there's going to be suspicion. And look, at the end of the day, we have an American president trying to broker peace in the Middle East. I mean, you wokeism might leave us wanting to say America should have no part in brokering such a thing. And therefore, why on earth would you have any experience to play, like bringing in a Tony Blair or a Jonathan Powell? The reason for that, notwithstanding people's objections, and there may be many, and they may be ones that we should absolutely entertain and respect, But experience matters, and experience of delivering the goal matters. And I can remember in the ongoing conversations I was having, even 9 years after the Good Friday Agreement was signed with people, you would have the DUP objecting to this person, and you would have Sinn Féin objecting to that person, even 9 years on from the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. In other words, people are always going to object. The question is, can you keep it moving forwards? Can you keep the momentum happening? And the interesting thing about Blair, I think, in all of this is that, he is a controversial figure, but actually there's enormous power that comes with being such a figure. And the power of experience here is incredibly important. It isn't just that it's about Tony Blair. And I think, he's a person who does undoubtedly have great stature. But I think as Tony's got older, there's less ego now.
That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting point to end on, Shaun. How Tony Blair uses his power may be one of the crucial questions of the weeks ahead. Shaun Woodward, thank you very, very much for talking to me tonight. Smacking children has long been associated with robust discipline on the one hand and cruel abuse on the other. Now a group of celebrities are calling on the Prime Minister to ban smacking in England outright. More on that next. But first, time is 6:31 and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Nigel Farage says he's deeply, deeply concerned that an Afghan national who threatened to kill him will be released on licence in 18 months. 26-year-old Fias Khan, who arrived in the UK on a small boat, was jailed for 5 years earlier. A former advisor to several Israeli prime ministers has told LBC Hamas will have to be part of the future of Palestine. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Daniel Levy said without a credible political process, the group will refuse to fully hand over its weapons. And economists are predicting the UK will have the highest inflation in the G7 this year and next. The International Monetary Fund says the average rate at which the costs of goods will rise by 3.4% for 2025. LBC weather, clear spells for Scotland and the southwest tonight, cloudy elsewhere with a chance of drizzle in the far north and far southeast, lows of 3 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
If you don't understand the trial of the Chinese spies alleged, then join us to find out what went on and why it actually matters.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
At Pets in a Pickle, we're here when it matters most. For fuss-free pet insurance policies as unique as they are. Visit petsinnerpickle.co.uk.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto-invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's Kuflink. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
One of the best things about a holiday with Saga is your chauffeur, who'll pick you up and drive you to your departure point. Whether you're cruising through Europe's iconic cities along the Danube or enjoying a rainforest tour through Costa Rica. Even better, they'll pick you up and drive you home again afterwards. 2026 season now on sale. Search Saga Holidays. Experience is everything. Nationwide chauffeur service available on UK mainland. Full terms apply. Over 50s only.
Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £14 million.
It'll have you dancing like nobody's watching. Yeah, baby. Just make sure nobody is watching. Get in tonight's Euro Millions draw. Play on app.
Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
It's 6:34. If you live in Wales or in Scotland, you cannot legally smack or hit your child. But in England, smacking remains legal so long as it is considered a reasonable punishment for a child. Now a group of celebrities led by the actor Sir Michael Caine and the footballer Alan Shearer have written to Keir Starmer asking for it to be finally outlawed in England. I'm joined by the Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza. But before we hear her, let's get the testimony of the one-time Traitors star, Ash Bibi, who had to leave her home as a teenager because of the violence she faced there. So, Ash, what happened to you when you were a young girl?
I mean, I grew up in an abusive home. My father was very abusive towards my mother. I've talked about this a little bit, and also towards my siblings. So I do understand first-hand experience.
And when you say abusive, sorry, we're talking about physically abusive.
Physically, yes, physically abusive. And I think just having lived that myself, and I understand the unresolved trauma I lived with for many, many years. Obviously, there is a sliding scale of what discipline looks like, physical punishment looks like in the house. But I've also met many people who've been along that sliding scale. And nothing really good comes out of it. I can't really believe that we are actually sat here and having a conversation about whether it's okay to smack children. I just find it completely and utterly absurd, because you wouldn't think it's okay to go up to an adult and smack them if they were misbehaving. I don't understand why it's okay that we think we can do that with children.
And we use this slightly twee word, smack, but if we say instead hit, what do you think it does to a child who is hit in later life?
I mean, there's so many things. And also, obviously, it does depend on how severe it was. But even then, you know, you're taking away somebody's power. You're taking away somebody's voice. What you're essentially teaching children is that the only way to resolve a situation is through violence, because whether it's a light tap or whether it's a hard smack, it's still seen as violence. For a young child who doesn't understand this, that's what they're seeing. So what do we achieve from this?
So how did your early experience affect you, do you think, as an adult?
I think in many different ways. I've always felt afraid. I was somebody who tend to cower away a lot, but then I managed to find a way out, thanks to the NSPCC and Childline, actually, and teachers at school. But I imagine that I'm one of the very few success stories. You know, I can't imagine the amount of pain and suffering that children who wouldn't know how to do that, wouldn't know how to get out of that situation, what they go through and what they feel.
We've had lots of stories of, individuals. We've had murders, which came after a long period of abuse inside the house. But we have also got communities of different kinds, traditional Christian communities say this is how we discipline our children. They're better, more disciplined adults. We've got all sorts of minority Muslim families and others who also use physical punishment. And they say it's kind of our right, it's our family. It's not for the state to intervene. What would you say to them?
I don't think... This, to me, also just feels really strange, because I don't think physical punishment or physical abuse in the house has anything to do with any culture. It doesn't see any colour. It doesn't see any culture. Abuse is abuse, and it exists in every single culture that we're in, so I don't think it's specific to one or another.
And so tomorrow morning, Keir Starmer gets up, brushes his teeth, sits down with his coffee and his boiled egg or whatever he has, and he's got this letter in front of him from Michael Caine and Alan Shearer and many more. And it says, please ban smacking in England. He's also aware that lots of conservative media will say this is the wrong thing to do. What would be your message to him?
I would have to say that instead of asking, what else we can do instead of smacking kids as discipline, I don't think that should even actually be a question. I think what we should actually be looking at is the parents and adults, because ultimately that's where it starts from. And it's an adult or a parent lack of communication
towards a failure, really.
Yes,
it's a failure.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and I don't think children should be punished for that. Yeah.
Ash Bibi, thank you very much for that. Now, sitting listening to us in the studio is, of course, Dame Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England. Rachel, you're in a slightly strange position because your equivalents in Wales or Scotland know that smacking is now completely banned there. Northern Ireland's a different case. Why has England fallen behind, or fallen, behind's the right word, Wales or Scotland?
Look, you can ask that question. I mean, let's just have a look at this law. We're not asking for a no smacking law. What we're asking for is the removal of the reasonable chastisement defence in law. Do you know when that came in? That came in the 19th century when a teacher killed a child for beating them, and they put a reasonable chastisement clause in to say, you can only reasonably beat a child.
Killing the child is not reasonable.
Exactly. And we're talking about removing that clause so that children have in law the same rights as other adults, other human beings. And in fact, at the moment, animals have more rights than children for this. You can't beat animals. So I actually think that would be my answer to Keir Starmer, is that this law is really impinging on children's rights and you need to sort it out. And actually, before the election, he wanted to do that. So I need to see him do that.
How much do you think this is about corporal punishment in the culture? All those, boarding schools and those elite schools which used it for years and years and years. You could mention the nuns in certain schools as well. It's been something that was almost laughed about in the culture, though,
Look, yeah, it's true. I mean, when I went to school, when I was a schoolgirl, the nuns would cane people, and But look, that has not been acceptable for many years. And look, as a head teacher for 20 years, I never once had to raise my hand or would even dream of doing it to have discipline, because actually children thrive on boundaries, relationships, love, clarity of boundaries and consequences. The consequences, really violent consequences, are going to just traumatise. So I think there is this history of, it happened to me, so it can't be, it's fine for them. In fact, I've heard politicians say that a good slap around the head never did me any problem. Well, it does. I just want to remind everybody of the terrible death of Sarah Sharif. And her father...
I was wondering about that, yes.
Her father phoning the police and saying, I reasonably chastised my daughter and she's dead. I don't want any child to have to face that. Any child. So, I think those jokes are, silly but dangerous. We absolutely... And if you look at Wales and Scotland, there has been no increase in prosecutions. There have been some families who've needed a bit of support, and how to a bit of support in terms of parenting. Parenting is hard. And I wouldn't want any parent to feel, because I grabbed my child or, I chased them up the stairs and those are moments in time. But I really think society has moved on. Scotland and Wales approved it. And I do not think young parents are thinking, let me beat my child and make them behave.
They approved it years ago. So this is presumably really urgent, because out there will be another Sarah Sharif who is being hit tonight.
Yeah.
And so this is something that Keir Starmer really, in your view, has to get on with.
I honestly, those chilling words, I legally chastise my child and I've killed her. Like every time a smack to a child doesn't lead, causally to something terrible, but every terrible thing started with that. It's got to stop.
Rachel, I know that you go around talking to a lot of children as part of your job, a central part of your job. Are children talking to you about this subject? It's still going on around the country? It's still something that's being raised with you?
Absolutely. And across the board. And I think it's one of those painful secrets that come out. I often have queues of children, and I see children in schools, in youth clubs, in prisons, in mental health wards, and particularly among our most vulnerable children. There's almost always histories, of violence, of abuse, and often then copycat things. We have to protect childhood. I think we are really bad in this country at saying childhood is really important. It's a thing. We need to protect it. We need to support it. We need to do this. And politicians need to talk about family, and we need to do this.
And finally, with all your experience, what is your view of the effect of hitting children on the adults they then become?
I think it deeply affects personality and behaviour as adults, and you are embedding a cycle of violence that will either parents will do it because that's what their parents did to them, or be deeply hurt about what happened to them, and it's got to stop. Now is the time. We have a Prime Minister who wanted to put a stop to this before he became Prime Minister. So do it, Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer, if you're listening, now is the time. Dame Rachel de Souza, Bibi, Ash, thank you both very, very much for coming in. One of art's greatest mysteries has finally been revealed in an astonishing new book. Find out what the authors uncovered in just a few minutes' time, but it's now 6:45.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
An Afghan asylum seeker wants to be deported back home following his conviction for threatening to kill Nigel Farage. Shall I pay for the ticket, or would you like to?
Ian Dale on LBC.
Where does Tesco source its award-winning finest Chianti from? Well, it doesn't just come from any old winery. It comes from one of the oldest in the whole of Tuscany. We travel far and wide to source wines that we know you'll love. Yes, that's another award winner. It may seem like a little thing, but to us, it's everything. Tesco, every little helps. Drink aware 18 plus, available in the majority of larger stores.
Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £14 million.
It'll have you dancing like nobody's watching. Yeah, baby. Just make sure nobody is watching. Get in tonight's Euro Millions draw. Play on app.
Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
When BP asked me to read the voiceover for their new Wild Bean Cafe ad, I thought I knew what to expect. But when they told me I'd be reading the script next to a mountain waterfall, on horseback, strumming a harp, in a hailstorm, naked, ow, 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 well, that was wildly unexpected. Just like Wild Bean Cafe having a freshly ground signature espresso blend for everything from Americanos to flat whites in a fuel station. Wowzers. Wild Bean Cafe, only at BP. Subject to availability at selected BP stores only.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Fias Khan. You know the one. Kalashnikov tattoo on his face, 17 convictions in Sweden, came here in a small boat, threatened to kill Nigel Farage, sentenced earlier today to 5 years, out perhaps in 15 months. What should happen to him then? Let's start with LBC's reporter Guy Stewart, who was at the sentencing in Southwark Crown Court earlier today. And Guy, we heard an outburst from the dock.
Yeah, Fias Khan had initially revealed in court that he is claiming asylum in the UK only minutes later upon hearing his fate, to shout that he would rather be sent back to Afghanistan to see his family. And we really learned in court today, just in Sweden, he has AK-47s tattooed on his face, and he was convicted last week of threatening to kill the Reform UK leader in a TikTok video last October. He essentially live streamed his journey through Europe from Sweden across the channel in a small boat before being arrested by police. Just take a listen to what the Reform UK leader had to say outside Southwark Crown Court.
The only reason we know about this guy is because somebody sent it to me on TikTok. And it makes me wonder, how many other Madapassers are there now in this country, or will there be as the boats continue to cross the channel? A strange twist at the end, when he was after the sentence, and he was speaking from the dock, trying to be heard, making it perfectly clear that he'd rather go back to Afghanistan. Now, in Germany, there are plane loads of people going back to Afghanistan. I wonder if in 18 months' time, the only thing that stops him being on our streets is we have some kind of deal with Afghanistan. I doubt it, but at least it's a possibility, and the Germans have shown us what they can do.
So more on that in a second. It's worth saying that Judge Mrs. Justice Stein did recognise his position as a politician in the UK made threatening his life more serious. That's reflected in the 5-year term she laid down upon him. He was also found guilty of illegally entering the UK. He has essentially set the Home Office up for criticism by claiming he could be free in 18 months. The Home Office tells us tonight it has already increased the number of foreign national offenders it deports and will do everything in its power to do it again with this case.
So the real question then is what can happen in 18 months if that's when he's out? To give us a bit more information on the legal situation, let's hear now from Harjap Singh Bangal, an immigration and human rights lawyer. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Am I right in saying that if he is released, shall we say, in 18 months' time, then he cannot be deported without a new agreement that we don't have at the moment with Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, there is that. We do need an agreement with Afghanistan, or if Afghanistan can make an exception and say this man wants to voluntarily return, then he can be returned to Afghanistan. That is not an issue. And that, in fact, in a lot of cases where foreign national offenders are in prison, often there's something called an early return scheme, where if the Home Office is considering them for deportation, which it has to do legally under the UK Borders Act 2007, if somebody's sentenced more than to 12 months imprisonment, then they can early deport if he's willing and this person is willing to back to Afghanistan, and it will be treated as a voluntary return after a deportation order has been issued or after an agreement has been struck. So yes, he can be returned during his sentence, and it's not a given that after 18 months he will be released, because the Home Office can keep him detained further under immigration powers in a detention centre or even in prison.
So when Nigel Farage says that he was going to end up in a hotel or in a house paid for by the British taxpayer, that is relatively unlikely, would you say, at this point?
At this point, I would say that's relatively unlikely. Also, a very important thing has come to light, where this person has been convicted in Sweden and has been in Sweden. Now, before Brexit, we used to have a system called Eurodac, where the UK could identify up to 7 million people who had entered Europe just by their fingerprints at where they've entered their point of entry. Unfortunately, after Brexit, which is something ironically Mr. Farage advocated for, Britain has lost access to that. So therefore we don't know if somebody has claimed been convicted in Europe before, unless a check is done with the relevant authorities or information is given.
And finally, if it's possible to give us a quick assessment of this, we haven't got an agreement with Afghanistan. There are lots of other countries where refugees or migrants are coming in large numbers from, where we haven't got agreements either. Do you see any change in the political atmosphere around those issues so that it becomes possible to return people to Afghanistan, to Eritrea and elsewhere?
Well, once again, when we were part of the EU, we had various agreements as a bloc to return people. But after Brexit, unfortunately, someone refused or failed to negotiate return agreements. But the Labour government has stated since it came in that it is doing its utmost to get return agreements with a lot more countries. And hopefully, they hope by the end of their term, they will have a lot more of these in order to deal with failed asylum seekers.
Really, really interesting, Mr. Singh Bangal. Thank you so much for talking to LBC. The Girl with the Pearl Earring by Vermeer is among the best-known pictures in the world. It's even got its own novel and its own film with Scarlett Johansson. But who is she? And what was Vermeer really on about when he captured the mesmerising sideways glance of a young woman wearing a blue turban? The art historian Andrew Graham-Dixon has been to Vermeer's hometown of Delft in the Netherlands in search of one of the most enigmatic of all the great painters, and he seems to have solved one of the great mysteries in his new book, Vermeer, A Life Lost and Found, and he's with me now. Andrew, congratulations. This is quite exciting. I'm quite excited by this.
I'm glad to hear that.
So the first thing we should explain to people, a gallery of a house. And you have identified that was the house of his great patrons, where he spent a lot of time.
Well, I've done a lot of work for the last 20 years on trying to identify Vermeer's friends, his patrons, who they were, what they might have been part of, and what we knew from the beginning. It's been hiding in plain sight in a way, is that all of his pictures are painted for one house, one person. And it now seems, to me anyway, this is the thesis advanced in my book, that he and they were part of a particular religious, intellectual, political movement which was all about, it's great news in many ways, Vermeer was a wonderful person. His friends were wonderful people. They were the first pacifists. They were the first feminists. They were the first proponents of a free and open society. And the girl with the pearl earring was one of them. She was the daughter of the patrons.
They were the good guys. They called themselves the Remonstrants, I think, but they were basically the good guys. They were the most liberal group in the Holland of that period. And the girl herself, what do you think you know about her?
She is a lady called Magdalena van Rauven. She is the daughter of Vermeer's patrons. They only had one daughter, one child who survived. Two died in early infancy. She was named after Mary Magdalene. The collegiants, the remonstrants, these people whom Vermeer was part of, they venerated the apostles of Christ, they venerated Christ. They said you should model yourselves on them, you shouldn't get involved in theological intricacy, you should
turn the other cheek, look after your neighbour, all that.
That's right, yep. Love the children, never tolerate for children to be injured in war and so on, all of that. And Magdalena was named after Mary Magdalene. And
how old was she when she was painted, do you think?
Between the ages of 12 and 13, I would say. And I think the painting was done on the verge of her adult baptism. They believed in adult baptism. You couldn't be baptised as a child, because how could a child commit themselves and commit their lives to following the teachings of Christ in the sense of being merciful and charitable and doing good things?
Yeah.
So
that's something a lot of the Protestant churches.
She is portrayed in the likeness of Mary Magdalene. It's a Tronje, which is a portrait in character. So it's Magdalena as her namesake, Mary Magdalene, at the moment when, and this was a moment that they wrote about, talked about, thought about a great deal. A lot of these Protestants, they were women, a lot of them, and they thought about that. And this is the moment when she turns in the garden and she sees Jesus. And he's just said to her...
She's glancing at Jesus.
She is realising, Jesus has revealed himself to me, a woman. The first person to whom he reveals himself is a woman.
And the other thing I want to bring up about this is the pearl earring itself and the surroundings of Vermeer's paintings generally, because they may be very devout, but this is not a particularly puritanical or anti-fun or anti-nice things kind of group of people. His paintings are full of beautiful carpets and beautiful bits of furniture and the light on lovely walls and prints. This is a kind of visually rich culture and probably quite an enjoyable culture to be part of.
They were rich people, but they were not materialistic. The point of them being rich was to give their money away. We know they gave their money away. Magdalena's mother gave 1/3 of her money to refugees of war. She gave 1/3 of her money to the poor, and she gave 1/3 of her money to the indigent. So it all went. You wore the pearl, but you gave the pearl away.
That's really, really interesting. And Vermeer himself, tell us a little bit more about him, because he is this magical painter, an almost impossibly brilliant painter. Relatively few of his paintings survive.
Very few of his paintings survive. He painted his pictures for this group of people. He painted for their beliefs, to their beliefs. And his paintings are about their prayers. Their prayers for peace, their prayers for a peaceful world, their prayers for a world in which there need be no conflict between one Christian and another, between any Christian, any Muslim, these people are really ahead of their time.
And they're living in a beautiful world.
They're living in a world that's been...
sun-speckled, beautiful world.
They're living in a world that's been torn to pieces by the worst wars in all of human history.
And yet is still beautiful.
They're coming out of that world and they're saying, we can get better from this, we can cure this, we can solve this. That's what the pictures are about.
Well, on this day, after we've been discussing Gaza and all the rest of it, it's a really nice place to end the show. Andrew Graham-Dixon, congratulations again, and thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.
He said he'd rather go back to Afghanistan.
conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, Hamas says it will release the bodies of 4